Whichever version you go for, you'll quickly discover, like in any Mazda since, I don't know, the mid-90s, there's a little bit of MX-5 in all of them. Cool, it feels like ages since we reviewed a brand new Mazda on the Carbuyer channel. Sure, there was the CX-5 from earlier in 2022, but that was more of a facelift than a brand new car. And while its Japanese competitors have been getting those small city cars and family cars ready, Mazda has been looking at a right fancy flagship. Sitting above the CX-5 that I just mentioned is this. This is the CX-60. This is the CX-60. And it's unusual in more than one way. So if you stick around, like this video and subscribe, I'll tell you exactly why. So yeah, forget Mazda's naming structure. It doesn't really make much sense. And actually, that might become something of a theme over the next few minutes. You see, unlike a lot of manufacturers, Mazda still isn't really on board with the whole EV thing. So while you can have the CX-60 as a plug-in hybrid, as we have here, there's no electric version, at least for the time being. There's also a 3.3 litre diesel engine, plus a 3 litre petrol on the way. Not a 2 litre or even a 2.5, a whopping great 3 litre engine. Electric or not, this thing is rather quick, but in terms of styling, looks like a Mazda on the outside, looks like a Mazda 2.0 on the inside, but we'll come back to that in a moment. Here though, look, big grille, big Mazda badge, not that dissimilar to what you get on the CX-5, same with the headlights, again, pretty similar. Okay, it's probably not quite as well proportioned as the CX-5 in my opinion, but when you've got this much sheet metal to play with, there's probably not that much you can do about it. Up here, you really do notice that size advantage for the CX-60 versus the CX-5. It feels like a much bigger car, especially in the back, but we'll come to that in a moment. In terms of quality though, God, it really is a properly premium feeling product in here. It's easily on par with a BMW X3 or an Audi Q5. I mean, Mazda's always jostled with the Germans when it comes to interior quality. I suppose it's fitting that it comes closest with its flagship. Top spec cars come with this maple wood down here on the center console. You've got Nappa leather for the seats, which is actually a higher grade than you get on the standard versions. It's perhaps not the most practical for a family car, but this one's done, well, nearly 3,000 miles, many of which with an 8-year-old in the back, and is standing up pretty well to the test of time. Elsewhere, you get this stitching on the dashboard. That's apparently inspired by a traditional Japanese binding technique. It's just, it really lifts the cabin quality. And even the plastics, actually, things that you kind of touch regularly, all feel really nicely built. Ergonomics as well, that's a pretty good thing in here. You've got some buttons down here for the climate controls. One thing we've noticed though is this screen up here. The majority of the functions, all of the Mazda inbuilt functions, you have to use this rotary controller. Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, on the other hand, is touch sensitive, but only if you're doing less than 3, 4, 5 miles an hour. So you've integrated touch sensitivity into the screen, but you could only use it on certain functions and at certain speeds. That just doesn't make sense to me. Sometimes if you're just driving along, you want to prod something like the map or music, it's easier to do it than scrolling through all the various menus. I'm sorry Mazda, it seems you just can't win. The Mazda CX-60 currently comes in 3 trim levels: Exclusive Line, Homura and Takumi. But even the cheapest comes with a strong level of standard equipment: LED headlights, sat-nav, a reversing camera and a heated steering wheel, and heated front seats. You even get a head-up display. Upgrade and you'll get 20-inch wheels like these, ventilation for the front seats and heaters for the rear, plus a 12-speaker Bose surround sound system. Takumi, which is what we've got, largely brings design and material upgrades. Lovely, but not worth the extra, we don't think. There's a couple of option packs available, but if you want a CX-60 personally, we would stick with one of the lower 2 trims and avoid any extras. Full specs can be found at carbuyer.co.uk. Just use the drop-down menus to search for Mazda CX-60. Now before we start driving, I just want to show you something. From the mid-spec and above, you get Mazda's driver personalization system, which adjusts your driving position according to your height and is apparently supposed to give you the perfect driving position. It uses facial recognition technology as well, so if you get in instead of your partner or your colleague, it'll adjust the position to exactly how you had it before. And I'm going to try it out and see what it comes up with. At the moment, I'm in my perfect driving position, so let's see. Add new driver. Okay, what, just over 6 foot, so 6 foot, start. Okay. Well, that to me is already far too far away from the wheel, and I just feel a little bit too upright, so we're going to cancel that and crack on. Now, as we mentioned, there's no electric version of the CX-60, but even with the batteries fully charged, this plug-in hybrid version doesn't feel particularly electric either. There have been times, even at a standstill, that I've had to look down at the dash to see if that little EV light is glowing. It really does feel like the engine is running at all times. I'm actually struggling to think of an electrified car that feels less electric than the CX-60. Regardless, with 323 brake horsepower, the CX-60 is pretty quick. 0-62 takes 5.8 seconds, and that electric motor means that whenever you want power, it's pretty much there in an instant. There's perhaps a little bit of a jerk when it's trying to decide between petrol, electric, or a bit of both, but once you're up to speed, the gearbox is pretty slick. Like any plug-in hybrid, if you charge it up regularly, a task that will take around 2.5 hours from a 7 kilowatt wall box, then you can run around almost solely on electric power. With a 39-mile range, it's more usable as an EV than some cars in this class, while pretty much matching the equivalent Audi Q5. But it's this engine that opens Mazda up to the company car market. Low benefiting kind tax will give the car new appeal for business users. And yet even the diesel engine looks pretty impressive, at least on paper. It won't suit those tax-conscious company car drivers, but if you do lots of miles as a private buyer, you cannot scoff at 56.5 mpg in a car such as this. CO2 emissions for that model stand at between 129 and 137 grams per kilometre, depending on whether you go for rear or all-wheel drive. While we haven't yet driven the diesel engine, I'd wager it's probably going to be quite a lovely thing. You see, the smaller four-cylinder in the CX-5 is smooth, it's punchy, it's got loads of torque, and let's be honest, a bigger, more powerful version in the CX-60 is only likely to be a worthy addition to the range. There's a petrol as well, but I'm struggling to see why you'd pick it over the diesel or the plug-in hybrid. It's only likely to be less economical. Whichever version you go for, you'll quickly discover, like in any Mazda since, I don't know, the mid-90s, there's a little bit of MX-5 in all of them. And while that's normally a good thing, the issue I've got here is the steering just seems hypersensitive, so you're constantly making tiny adjustments that in other cars would just kind of nudge you between the lane. In the CX-60, you're pretty much changing lanes. I'd liken it to when you sit down at someone else's computer and you discover that they've got their mouse on the absolute fastest setting and it's bouncing from one side of the screen to the other. Yes, you would get used to it, but it's just not as simple and easy and relaxing to drive as some of this car's rivals. The flip side is it's more involving to drive than, say, an Audi Q5. It's keen to turn in, it's obviously quick, as we've just mentioned. There's more body lean on the CX-60 than you'll get in a BMW X3 or a Jaguar F-Pace, but again, that's maybe a bit of MX-5. That car always rolled a little bit so that you always knew what was going on underneath you. Oddly though, it doesn't seem to have helped the ride. It's borderline too firm around town and it just seems to fidget. And yeah, okay, it does get a little bit better the faster you go, but it never truly settles. We would check that you're happy with the ride on these 20-inch wheels before you select them. Now the CX-60, like a lot of cars in this class, with the exception of the Land Rover Discovery Sport and a couple of others, is a strict 5-seater. That might put some people off, but in reality it's probably no bad thing. Cars in this segment often sacrifice a big chunk of boot space for those extra seats, and they're never really suitable for anyone other than the smallest kids. And actually, by focusing on the second row, the CX-60 offers pretty decent space for rear seat passengers. It's 20 centimetres longer overall than a CX-5, so there's definitely a bit more knee room. And there are no issues for 6-foot adults, even with the panoramic roof. The windows are tall too, so you get a good view out. Now typically, plug-in hybrids offer less boot space than the equivalent petrol or diesel cars, but at least on paper, Mazda claims that this boot is the same size as the diesel version, 570 litres, and that's quite a lot more than the 450 you get in a Q5 TFSI E. But Mazda does include the underfloor storage in that, so maybe give or take a little bit there. But that space, regardless, is quite useful for keeping the charge cables. And while there is a nice feature, as well as this load cover that lifts with the tailgate, we would like a few more hooks or tie down points in the back there. This is a big boot, so things that you put in do tend to roll around a little bit. What is good though in here, you get a 3-pin plug in the side here, a 12-volt socket as well on the other side, and levers for folding down the rear seats. Do that and you've got a good solid 1,726 litres of space, which is more than a Discovery Sport, and well, if Mazda had thought about it, enough for another pair of seats. Let's round things off with some Dealmakers and Dealbreakers. There's no pure electric version, but the engines are brawny and seemingly don't sacrifice on the fuel economy front. You can choose between petrol, diesel or plug-in hybrid. The cabin isn't perfect, but it feels luxurious, certainly as high-end as the equivalent Audi or BMW. The CX-60's kit list is pretty generous too. We'd stick with either the entry-level or mid-spec trim, as these represent the best value for money. On the other hand, while it's big, the CX-60 could be more practical in more ways than one. There's no 7-seat option, but more importantly, it lacks little features like hooks in the boot or full touch functionality for the central screen, little fixes that could make a big difference. The ride is definitely on the firm side. We've not tried the smaller wheel option, but we'd definitely take a test drive to check you're happy. Sensitive steering is worth trying too. The Mazda CX-60 is a left field alternative to the German SUV establishment. It's big, it's spacious, it's filled with kit, and that interior is really rather lovely. The biggest issue, and surprisingly for a Mazda, is the way this car drives. It's jittery and it's not all that comfortable, which is unusual for a big SUV. And this plug-in hybrid system, despite its long electric range, doesn't feel electric enough. So left field, it remains. It's not perfect, but then not much in this class is. If you like this video, then why not watch our review of the Jaguar F-Pace or our SUVs playlist. Thanks for watching.